This podcast is brought to you by Delta Neural Health, located in Columbus, Ohio, where non-invasive, personalized care is revolutionizing the way we approach complex neurological issues. With cutting-edge techniques in functional neurology, functional medicine, and chiropractic care, we're leading the way in managing conditions like concussion, dizziness, brain fog, anxiety, POTS, attention, and more. To learn more, visit our website at deltaneuralhealth.com. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Neural Health broadcast. Today we are joined by Kedar Hiremath. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe.
And so we've known each other for about a year or two now, kind of crossed paths a few times. You're doing great work with the Ohio State University and the Brain Research Association over there, Brain. So I love what you guys are doing, and I love the community outreach that you guys are providing to brain injury survivors. So I thought it would be great to have you on the podcast today to talk about some of that research, some of that outreach that you and your organizations are doing. So the first thing I like to ask my guests, and especially you, what's your background? How did you get interested in neuroscience and the brain and helping with TBI?
Yeah, that's a big question. And again, thank you for having me on here. You know, we we do a lot in brain injury, but
Mhm.
if you think about brain injury, right, it's going to be something that affects a lot of different parts of your life. And I think that's the part that got me more interested in this space than anything else. Um, so my background is convoluted. Um, I was raised by two biochemists, and so I spent a lot of time in research labs and, you know, the standard research lab like the white lab coat and the pipettes, and my job was always filling the pipette tipped container, which is a very tedious job, but I
Mhm.
enjoyed it. So I just got around science a lot when I was growing up. Was always interested in health and, maybe medicine or something, similar, something health related as a future career. And when I was in my teens, I really had a number of internships um, through Ohio State and other places where I got to work in mental health spaces. And so learning about what the practice of psychiatry was, um, spending time with kids who were in, really acute mental health situations, had survived suicides in some sense,
Mhm.
for a couple months, and I was just real. It was like a profound experience for me. We have great things that our brains can do, and sometimes our brains can work against us, and we don't always have control, and just kind of getting a sense of what are we? How do we work? What makes us tick? And
Mhm.
so I think that was kind of the realization that I was really interested in more the brain or cognition,
Mhm.
mood, all those kinds of things.
Mhm.
Um, I did an undergraduate degree at Case Western,
Mhm.
and part of that I was a psych major, and so again, kind of going down that path and took a pre-medical curriculum, some stuff in anatomy and chemistry, and so I just kind of had built up this idea of mental health, but also biology and just the understanding of the primary things that you need to know for a clinical type of career.
Mhm.
And some things I just didn't like about the practice of medicine, and I felt like I'm sort of a systems guy. Um, so I just thought I'd spend my day really annoyed with limitations of the job as opposed to doing the job. And
Mhm.
so I went and actually did a master's in public health, which really helped me understand the way that medicine is practiced, the way that clinical care or health is
Mhm.
thought about in our country and other countries as well, the dollars and cents of it.
Mhm.
And after I graduated, I had done some internships with our Department of Health. We had done studies on health communication, especially using websites.
Mhm.
And that might date me a little bit when we were just starting to think about how do we communicate health on web. And all those were like really interesting experiences, but not really
Hmm.
the job that I wanted.
Hmm.
I worked in a small business trying very similar to what your practice looks like, Joe. And
Hmm.
just doing something novel, doing something different, trying to really help people out at a more personal level. And
Hmm.
that was really interesting. And I realized, oh, there's a lot of research that's required here to kind of get these
Hmm.
novel or off the beaten path types of therapies off the ground,
Hmm.
trusted, paid for, um, you know, and so that was a really eye-opening experience. I realized I didn't have enough training with my master's degree, and so I went and got a different master's degree, which was in business.
Hmm.
And Ohio State was really lovely about giving me a job and paying for my degree.
Hmm.
And in part of that job, I ran a research program for graduate students and postdoctoral researchers who were studying muscle health, neuromuscular diseases, cancer-related muscle conditions. And I did that with Children's Hospital here in Columbus as well as Ohio State. And I really love that environment. I
Hmm.
enjoyed seeing all the different kinds of science and also not having to do the science, but just really get to be a part of it and see it
Hmm.
and help drive it. And in 2016, I got the opportunity to interview for this new program called the Chronic Brain Injury Program,
Hmm.
which was, trying to solve the chronic challenges of brain injury. And to be
Hmm.
honest, I had never thought about brain injury. I was thinking about things that are relevant to it, but not
Hmm.
this specific type of neurological condition. And it was eye-opening.
Hmm.
Um, I find it to be a very difficult problem in society to solve, which
Hmm.
I love because then it's a really good challenge. And so I've stuck with that for the past 10 years, and it's been a really great experience for me.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like with your background, I mean, strong science background, you have an interest in the nitty-gritty aspects of the neuroscience. You're already interested in the brain itself and how you said how we tick, right? And how the brain works, how that psychosomatic components might, play a factor, right? What's the psychology of the brain? How does the neuromuscular, elements of the brain. But then also you have this big picture view as well with your master's in public health. So you can really kind of zoom in and zoom out, right? So I think that is awesome for you to be in the position you are. And taking all that into consideration, you kind of mentioned a lot of the problem, or you mentioned that there are a lot of problems that need to be solved in the world of chronic brain injury, right? So it's not a simple, straightforward thing. Like I like to say, never, there's no brain that's ever the same. There's no brain injury that's ever the same. So what are some of maybe the common issues that these brain injury survivors are running up against, and what are you and some of the organizations you're a part of working to solve those problems?
Well, it's a big question, right? So, every brain injury is different. I mean, we start with that, right? The brain's as unique as you are. And when it gets injured, the experiences that you bring to the injury, the experiences that you have afterwards, the things that are important to you and how you tick, right,
Hmm.
all matter. But there are some commonalities, that we start to notice over time. And part and parcel, it's that we just don't recognize that people have them.
Hmm.
So screening for brain injury, recognizing those signs and symptoms, and the challenge of sometimes they show up later.
Hmm.
And so, we miss them a lot. And so I think that's the first thing is that people don't have a name for a condition that they may have.
Yeah.
Um, we also kind of write it off with, the mild TBIs or what we'll call
Hmm.
concussion. That, it's, well, you'll get better. And most people do.
Hmm.
And so, you know, is it something that we take seriously? Is it something that we invest in?
Hmm.
Is an open question, I guess. And, you know, so I think people might be walking around with those impacts that are chronic in nature that they just don't know about. And if they don't know about it, it's hard to ask the question about it. It's hard to catch it in other kinds of venues. And so sometimes they just start to realize, like, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z.
Hmm.
And if we can connect the dots, right, we can kind of bring it back to, oh, well, you had a hit on the head, or
Hmm.
lost consciousness, or you experienced a time point where you didn't have oxygen to your brain.
Hmm.
And so these things really can be uncovered in that way, and then and can be dealt with. I think in the dealing with it, right? So, you got to screen for it. Can you image it? Can you, find out on sort of a screening questionnaire?
Hmm.
I think those are big things that we need to get more available in the health system and other
Hmm.
systems as well. And I guess that opens up the door to it's not just a health thing.
Hmm.
When you woke up this morning, what didn't you use your brain for?
Right.
And, even if it's a very automatic thing like using the restroom or something like that,
Hmm.
your brain is still controlling that. And
Yeah.
so, in many ways, that's your body, but then you drove to work or you made a cup of coffee or you made a grocery list.
Hmm.
Maybe you had to study for school or pack a bag or remember an appointment. And all of those things are just part of life, but those can be impaired when you have a brain injury, and those can be those challenging things to try and fix
Hmm.
after a brain injury as well. And so they can persist. And so I think that's kind of the other piece, is that how does this really intersect with the rest of your life?
Yeah.
And are those systems out there that govern that, like getting your driver's license?
Hmm.
Are they set up to be brain injury informed and supportive? And I think that is another piece of the task that we have.
Hmm.
And then the last thing I think is that people struggle to get solutions.
Hmm.
There's no pill for brain
Hmm.
injury. There's no device for brain injury
Hmm.
that works for everybody. And
Yeah.
so a lot of times you are shopping around, you are trying things. Um, it takes resources to do that. Um, and you have to hold down that job, and you have to hold down your
Hmm.
relationships, and right. And so I think it just becomes this really challenging problem, not because there aren't solutions out there that could help you, but
Hmm.
getting to them is really difficult. And they're fragmented. So you got to go to a lot of different places. And so
Hmm.
I think it's just a challenging thing to navigate in many ways. And so a lot of times you're going to see brain injury programs and state services and things like that, and providers like yourself really
Hmm.
help to narrow down the number of things that people have to do so that they can get those resources to them
Yeah.
rather than finding them as organically or in a Google
Right.
search and having to figure it out.
Right. Right. And there's a couple things that listening um to that came to mind. Just you're talking about, interacting every day with just something simple as going to the bathroom or picking up a cup to take a drink or driving to work.
Yeah.
All these things require such complex neurophysiological processes, and a brain injury can just disrupt these communication networks, and all these things that we take for granted day in, day out, like picking up a cup. Those things can be severely impacted by a brain injury. But, and
Yeah.
we're living in this ever increasing complex world, right? At what point in time in the last, I mean, really the last 100 years did we drive, right? So and where that was a common thing at the speeds that we're going, and now we have to have, really sharp brains to be able to do these things, and then, process to the speed of these computers, and life is just getting faster and faster, and we're kind of pushing our brains to the max, and then, you throw a brain injury onto that, and it's like, yeah, I can't do those things now, or some simple things, or some complex things. So, and you kind of mentioned, it's there's a bit of a spectrum too. You've got your mild concussion, your mild TBI, and then you've got maybe a more significant TBI where you may have had a stroke, right? Um, so I really appreciated what you were saying there. And also something else that was coming to mind is it may sound, obvious when we say brain injury. It's like we know what that might look like or what that might be, but really there are a number of things that could be classified as a brain injury. So can we just before we go too much further, can we just define what a brain injury is and what some things might lead to that diagnosis?
Sure. Well, you're the medical provider here, Joe. So, I'll defer to you here. The way that I think about it is, you're going to have traumatic brain injury where you hit your head on something, something hits your head, your brain gets rattled around. It could be a penetrating injury or a blunt injury. Could be a blast injury that we see, in military and most predominantly, but other places as well. And right, so some experience happened, like you fell or you were in a motor
Mhm.
vehicle accident, something like that. Um, and then there's that spectrum, right, as we talked about, of those, which was, mild to severe, right, moderate in the middle. It's just not a great system to classify things. It's kind of,
Mhm.
it's more akin to the size of the coffee cup you order, as opposed to the context and the nature of your injury, which do matter. And so
Mhm.
we're kind of moving towards that in the field right now. And so that's exciting.
Mhm.
There's a stroke, right, or some other type of, blood relate, limitation of blood and oxygen to a part of your brain,
Mhm.
number of different mechanisms for that. And so, sometimes we think of that as a cardiovascular thing, but it's also a brain injury.
Sure.
And there's more commonalities when it comes to, what a person needs in rehab.
Mhm.
Um, though the acute phase might be a little bit different.
Mhm.
And then you're going to have things that we wouldn't think about all that obviously. So, uh, you know, brain tumors, brain cancer,
Mhm.
but even just cancer treatment,
Mhm.
chemotherapy, radiation, right? These things
Yeah.
can be challenging for your brain. Um, Hypoxia or anoxia is a big one that we focus on as well, where your
Mhm.
brain has reduced oxygen or no oxygen, and of course in a stroke that's because of the blood flow. But
Mhm.
in other cases, it could be drowning, it
Mhm.
could be heart attack,
Mhm.
blood's just not pumping to your brain. It could be overdose.
Mhm.
It could be things that are very traumatic and violent, right? In the case of domestic violence in particular,
Mhm.
strangulation, and
Mhm.
and so a variety of kinds of people who might not ever say, I had a brain injury, but I experienced these kinds of things, or I know somebody,
Mhm.
kind of gives you that sense of this is more common than you think, and it's more tied into other things than you think. Um, I think, there's congenital stuff as well.
Mhm.
Um, so there's a lot of different things that you can classify in the big umbrella of brain injury.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think you kind of nailed the majority of them there. And, anoxic brain injury can look very different than a concussion, but, still at the end of the day, looking at it, at brain injury. Um, and I think one of the things that, I hear a lot with my patients is kind of this frustration existing in the world where they have this quote unquote invisible injury, right? Where they are the ones perceiving the world in a particular way that may not be, as efficient or, as appropriate as it used to be. Lights might be too bright, sounds might be too loud, they feel dizzy, they might just feel off, headaches, all these things that, they're perceiving necessarily, but we may not, superficially see. So that's a big problem that I have come across, or a big issue that a lot of my chronic brain injury patients say they struggle with. Um, what what's some maybe advice or maybe some things that you and your organizations and work are doing to, I guess, educate the public on the realities of brain injury?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different audiences that need to know more about this.
Hmm.
As you said, it's invisible. And I think we call it an invisible epidemic. In
Hmm.
the state of Ohio, it's 1 in 4 people that's going to experience a brain injury in their lifetime.
Is that really the
And
statistic?
yeah, yeah. And so it's pretty stark.
Hmm.
Will they have disability? Will they have chronic effects of that brain injury? It's hard to say. Sometimes those milds have persistent stuff and people recover from those severes miraculously. And so, can't really predict that very easily. Um, but that means we just have to do a lot of education for a lot of different kinds of people. And so,
Hmm.
I like to focus on survivors themselves. If we can find them and they didn't have, like I was saying earlier, if they didn't have a name for this thing that they're going through,
Hmm.
or there's this sort of, linchpin, primary driver of the symptoms and the life effects that they have, right? So we want to make sure that we give that a name for them.
Hmm.
And so educating different kinds of survivor groups, patient groups, advocacy organizations,
Hmm.
different channels where you might get your health care delivered, whether that's your school nurse,
Hmm.
whether that's your specialist doctor, your primary care doctor, your emergency, medical provider, and then also spaces, around those. Um, what we find is that physicians, unless they go into careers like you have, in neurology, they're likely not to learn too much about this.
Hmm.
And so that's another big place for us to educate. And we really focus on our students, our
Hmm.
students that are going to be pre-medical students, thinking about those clinical careers in any sense, whether that's even occupational therapy, physical therapy, social work,
Hmm.
counseling.
Hmm.
Do they know that brain injury A exists and B has these chronic complications, and C that there are things that you can do if you can help people get to those resources?
Yeah.
I think, those are the kinds of educational platforms that we focus on. So survivors and families, what do you do?
Hmm.
Who do you talk to?
Hmm.
Um, and then for those budding providers, that follow in footsteps like yours,
Hmm.
what do you need to know about this population? You could be a gynecologist, right? And
Hmm.
you're focusing on, birth and reproductive health, but you are going to see brain injury survivors.
Hmm.
And have you thought about, can they follow the directions that you're asking them to
Hmm.
follow? Are you judging them because they were late to their appointment? Is it because they didn't care, or is it because they really have a challenge in managing that schedule,
Hmm.
or with the transportation, right? And so those are the kinds of conversations we want to have in the clinical community of giving a name to it and explaining what the new science is and how they're going to see those folks as part of maybe a different diagnosis or a different concern.
Yeah.
And then I think the decision makers at the end of the day, there are policies, there are organizational policies, there are government policies, there are funding policies. And if brain injury is not part of those, we're probably doing more of band-aids instead of cures. And
Hmm.
so, we need to do a better job with that. And so, those are the three big audiences that we really focus on with our
Hmm.
communicating our research and our clinical guidelines.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think what I've seen with, Brain, the organization at OSU, I think you're helping to foster some of the most brain injury literate people and providers, out of, any other university that I've uh, witnessed. So I think you guys are doing a great thing there. Just raising
Yeah,
the
if I could
awareness.
say, about these students, I mean, so these are the brain organization is Buckeyes Raising Awareness in Neuroscience. It's
Mhm.
our undergraduate students who, as I was saying, we want to catch them before they go on to further training and give them that empathy for this population,
Mhm.
help them to see them. And I mean, they really get it.
Mhm.
And they're very motivated. They do a 5K race that's coming up here in
Mhm.
at the end of this month, where they raise funds for brain injury services and outreach programs. And I think they really do get it because it's just so central to a lot of the things that they're going to see and learn in medical school, but
Mhm.
also in any given person. So it's a really great part of my day working with
Mhm.
them.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, you guys do great work, so really appreciative of that. And I botched the name earlier. I was in the
Well, so
intro,
we have
so
so many different groups though, Kedar.
yeah.
I mean, it is confusing, right? And it's ironic because the environment for brain injury recovery is also confusing and
Right.
fragmented. So I'm with the chronic brain injury program, which actually is
Hmm.
changing its name just to make it even more fun for you. So
Perfect.
we'll be the Center for Brain Injury Recovery and Discovery at Ohio State. And so that's going to be
Okay.
the research group, right?
Hmm.
And then we have the student group that does a lot of the fundraising and outreach
Hmm.
support. That's Brain. And then we also have our clinical teams, right? So the
Hmm.
the Ohio State has the medical center that is, we have teams of neurologists, physiatrists, so physical medicine and rehab. There's a lot of subspecialties in there
Hmm.
that we work with, such as like rehab psych. Folks
Hmm.
don't know too much about rehab psychology,
Yeah.
but these are elements of a really multidisciplinary care team that
Hmm.
you got to have because it's
Yeah.
just so complicated
Yeah.
that you need all these kinds of professionals to come together.
Right. Right. Well, I'm curious, you know, being as connected as you are with your background, kind of these different knowledge sectors, and you're fighting the good fight every day, trying to get this, raise awareness, improve people's understanding of brain injury. If you were, say, putting power over the ultimate decision around uh, what gets done in and around brain injury, how do you think you would kind of change the landscape so that, you know, patients got the care that they needed, so that research got the funding it needed, and so that people appreciated and took brain injury as seriously as, we know it needs to be?
I'll call that the $6 billion
Yeah,
question
so that was a
because
big
that's how
question.
much it costs our state every year.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, the challenge is I don't know that there's a thing that I would do. There
Hmm.
might be a lot of different things that we would do.
Hmm.
Um, certainly everybody being aware that a concussion can have those chronic effects, more severe brain injury, so on. And that you really got to check that out if you've taken a fall, if you've, been in a car accident, if you've been in sort of those main drivers. We talk about sports injury a lot, and there's
Hmm.
really great laws about reporting and training related to concussion. And so, I'd like to see that in other spaces beyond the sports.
Hmm.
Um, you know, if we can find a way where at least we're talking about it and we're aware of it, I think a
Hmm.
lot of things would change. Um, helping people pay for their, their many medical appointments or clinical appointments or rehab programs.
Hmm.
I think that can be helpful because it's a drain on your finances.
Hmm.
We see a lot of association between brain injury and being unhoused, being underemployed or not employed.
Hmm.
And so you think about like maybe you're a lawyer and if you lose the ability to read well
Hmm.
or do the tasks that you would typically do, are you really going to be able to stay in that job long term? Accommodations are necessary, and so are those in place
Right.
or not? And then how do we help you recover your career and your ability to earn? And
Hmm.
so, there's just so many things that I really don't have an answer for. This is what I would do.
Hmm.
I think it's a lot of conversation, but
Hmm.
I would say if we can make our systems more brain injury informed, more brain injury aware, and provide resources for brain injury survivors to go through those systems as successfully as anybody else,
Hmm.
I think that would be a big start.
Yeah. No, good answer. And, one person can't do everything. So people listening to this, I'm assuming, are very interested in brain injury or very interested in brain injury advocacy. So they may be primed right now to really engage with maybe some of the projects that, you are working on. And so
Sure.
how can they support you and the projects that you're working on and the organizations that you're in to make some of those goals a reality?
Well, there's a lot of ways to do it. So, I think if you are a brain injury survivor and you're willing to give your time, join research studies. I mean, we the more people that we have in these research studies, the better information we'll get out of those research studies,
Hmm.
and also the better we'll be able to apply the findings to a variety of people. As we said, it's a unique to
Hmm.
yourself kind of an injury, and so I think that's one is just getting involved and being able to give your time and finding that to be worthwhile for you. I think those are big things.
Hmm.
We have a number of different kinds of studies. So, our group does basic science work. So we do mouse studies to better understand like what happens to brains as they
Hmm.
age, as they deal with different kinds of stressors. Um, you know, Funding for that is always important. And so, doing what you can in your space to either, directly donate or to advocate for more funding for these kinds of things at the state and federal level with
Hmm.
foundations. Those are
Hmm.
always big, right? Um, we do a lot of assessments and screeners. We try to find the best practices for those, whether that is a new tool, a new device, or it's a new form that you fill out, or the use of those forms. And so I think that's kind of a big one is if you are in a system that thinks about brain injury,
Hmm.
or might contend with a brain injury survivor, and I think they're all of them.
Hmm.
Are you able to ask that question of a given person? Do they know, or have they ever experienced a fall or a hit to the head, or
Hmm.
these kinds of things, and then accommodate that. Try your best to accommodate that.
Yeah.
Recovery is really challenging when we have a lot of different things that we study in terms of uh, whether it's a new medicine or a new tool to use. Um, but I think, companies who are out there that have an interest in the space, like I said, it's 1 in 4 people. It's a large market.
Hmm.
Um, you know, are they tuning their products? Are they thinking about innovation in a way that is brain injury inclusive? I think that's
Hmm.
probably what that kind of crowd could do.
Yeah.
And you might not be even doing things that are medical related. Let's say that you're a financial services provider.
Hmm.
Well, helping provide financial coaching to brain injury survivors could go a really long way.
Sure.
It's hard enough for any of us to try and figure out the best way to save and invest and so on.
Hmm.
And when you have medical bills and you got a chronic illness to manage,
Hmm.
it becomes super stressful. So there's a lot of different kinds of ways that the professional community outside of medicine can be very helpful.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then just getting out there and telling somebody about brain injury is a thing, right?
Hmm.
We know that from sports and what we've seen in professional athletics in particular has helped to elevate the idea that there are consequences to those brain injuries.
Yeah.
But I don't want it to just be limited to we associate this with sports because it
Hmm.
can happen in your job. It can happen in your daily life. When don't we walk down the stairs and miss a step and go, oh gosh,
Right.
and in some cases that could just be the fall that gets you that brain injury.
Hmm.
So it's hard to prevent, but I think it's something that we have to take care of. And so can our systems be a little bit more accommodating, and can our voices be a little bit louder about it?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think you're doing all the right things, and I think you hit on all the right elements there
I
to
appreciate that.
to get it done. And we'll keep doing what we can to support you guys, and broadcast your voice, and support Brain and all that good stuff. So yeah, I think you
Well,
guys are doing
I'll
great
say,
work.
providers like you are a big deal, right? You're taking the time with an individual survivor. They may not know they have that injury. They may not
Hmm.
know the extent of that. They may not know what they could or couldn't do about it. And
Hmm.
so kind of getting them that, the green light to say, okay,
Hmm.
here's a thing, and
Yeah.
and let's go and address that, and we'll try and tune it for you. I think that's a really just a fantastic thing. And if I can plug, there are places to call. So if you do have these kinds of injuries, there's the Ohio Brain Injury Program in our state
Hmm.
that provides a helpline to help you navigate, what comes next.
Hmm.
And similarly, the Brain Injury Association of Ohio,
Hmm.
which is an advocacy organization, also provides that a similar type of resource through their helpline, as
Hmm.
well as a lot of different educational sessions and things like that. So there are organizations out there, and I think it's just kind of getting to them.
Yeah.
And the last thing is we also do a podcast
Hmm.
called Neuronights, which is
Hmm.
where we've connected many times, and
Hmm.
so just kind of learning all these different perspectives, learning these new opportunities. If you're out there and you have an injury and maybe you feel not as hopeful about the
Hmm.
future, um, you know, there's new things all the time. And
Yeah.
so, we want to make sure that we connect you to the things that we should have told you probably, and you
Hmm.
might not have heard. Um, or here's something brand new, and let's help you keep up to date with all those things.
Yeah, Neuronights is a great resource, great for providers, great for patients, survivors, everyone in between. And I was actually going to ask for you to, yeah, give us as many plugs as you've got, as far as, so Neuronights would be a great resource, getting connected that way and getting involved in, that podcast. That's monthly, correct?
So we actually do them twice a month, and
That's right,
so
bi-monthly.
we have a conversation with the professional.
Hmm.
It could be medical, but it could also be, more community based.
Hmm.
And then we also do a survivor story. And I think
Hmm.
that's probably a pretty important bit is that if you're a survivor, or you know a survivor, them sharing their story goes a long way.
Hmm.
It can be helpful for us to ask the right questions in research.
Yeah.
We're pretty knowledgeable about it, but it's unique.
Hmm.
We don't always ask the exact right question. And so
Yeah.
getting survivors' voices in there is great. Getting survivors' voices in front of lawmakers, decision makers, I think is the other piece. And so survivor stories
Hmm.
go a long way. But most importantly, it also helps someone else realize I'm not the only one going through this. There's other
Hmm.
people that have these things. It's
Yeah.
normalizing, it's validating.
Hmm.
And I think that that is really, really great when we can see those connections made. And I'll tell you, Joe, the thing that honestly keeps me coming back to this community is that the
Hmm.
survivors give so much.
Hmm.
It's such a hard road for many of them,
Yeah.
but then they're so motivated to help other people.
Hmm.
Um, and sometimes they just need a direction
Yeah.
to get there. But it's just a wonderful kind of community to be, um, I'll say adjacent to,
Yeah. No, yeah, I absolutely agree. And once you've had one, you can really empathize. And if you're lucky to get on the other side of it, and that's probably a big driver is you want to get others across that hurdle as well. So,
for sure.
well, again, I really appreciate what you're doing. If you have any other final plugs or any ways that you want people to get in touch with you or your organizations, love for you to share that with us, or maybe I
Yeah.
can put that in the show notes as well if you have different links appropriate for different people.
I think the
Um,
easiest thing is, come check out our website, which is, I think, great. Oh, well, the camera's backward. There
there
we
you
go.
go.
So it's cbi.osu.edu.
Hmm.
It's a good first step for a lot of different things. For example, you can find our registry. So if you're a survivor out there, um, with traumatic brain injury or even spinal cord injury,
Hmm.
this is a place where you can sign up to get notified about research studies that are specific to what's going on with you.
Hmm.
And No pressure, and it's free to join. It's just that you'll get an email from us when we have a good study that fits you and you can connect and get involved. So I think that's really a big one because,
Hmm.
again, enrolling people into these research studies is pretty important.
Yeah.
Um, and you'll also find all the different programs that we have, but you also learn about the science that we're doing,
Hmm.
whether it's how to help you, sleep better, or if it is related to getting back to work and getting
Hmm.
through an insurance process,
Hmm.
or understand what students need when they have
Hmm.
brain injuries and how they can best thrive after injury. So there's just so many different things that we do. Um, and it probably is going to touch part of your life, whoever's out there listening,
Yeah.
either you or somebody you know. So,
Yeah.
cbi.oc.edu, that'd be a place to go.
Excellent. All right. Well, we'll also put that link in the show notes as well for everybody to just click on,
Awesome.
make it easier.
Thanks.
Well, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you coming on and, sharing your wisdom, sharing your knowledge with our audience and, anyone listening. Go check out Neuronites, fantastic resource. Go check out all these other resources that Kedar let us in on today. Yeah, and don't lose hope. And, there are people fighting for you and with you. So if,
Yeah, positivity is huge. Positivity is huge. Uh,
Mhm.
Joe, thank you so much. I mean, again, it's been great working with you in other contexts too, but it's nice
Yeah,
to have this conversation today.
absolutely. Well, I'll see you at the end of the month at this 5K.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds
So,
good.
all right. And for everyone listening, take care.